Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. In this video, I will prove that I am who I say that I am, and that many people know that I'm right. The smartest 30% of the world when it comes to life intelligence, they all know that I'm right. If they're, say, 18 or over, to keep it simple. So first, let's look at Romans 1, verse 20. And we'll talk about martial arts and mental development and, memory and the things that are part of martial arts. And then we'll read Romans 1, verses 18 through 22 to understand it all. So Romans 1, verse 20, in the section is titled God's Wrath Against Sinful Humanity. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse, right? Since creation. So if you're an ignorant racist person and you hate black people or something, you might start creation maybe 4000 BC, right? Which a serious scientist would think that you're insane for doing. Because we see the continuity of intelligent thinking that goes back really before 300,000 BC. We see the continuity from Africa. When we look at the timeline, we see that that argument simply doesn't add up. The most impressive steps that were taken from an early primitive human state to a state of martial civilization that predates the world's oldest empire, clear-cut empire, which is for the most part is considered to be ancient Egypt. Okay, so we see these early martial sort of societies, primitive martial arts, not very advanced, primitive martial arts, okay, with the spears, with the fishing, right, with some people building things and so on and so forth. And we see that continuity from Africa. There's no sign that there's one group of Homo sapiens that breaks off that is far more intelligent than the rest. Like they're all basically on the same level, right? There's no sign that there's this ancient Aryan race, that's far more intelligent. It's just not the case. Not a single speck of evidence. And when we trace it all the way to the ancient empires, we see that the people in Europe are not doing anything very impressive, right? Maybe Stonehenge is nothing very impressive. And we see these potent martial arts taking place in Africa, not just in Egypt, but in Kush. That's where the major martial arts centers of the world were around 4000 BC, was in Africa, including in Egypt. And so we see that these martial artists, right, the warrior kings, the warrior pharaohs, and their martial art organizations and groupings, they're the ones who civilized the world. It was only after Egypt do we see the Indus Valley civilization, right? And these people are dark-skinned people. There's a lot of racism in science, a lot of Eurocentric scientists who are trying to cover up the role of dark-skinned people in India. You would think that they wouldn't be trying to do that, right? They're trying to do that both in India and in Egypt and in other places as well, and in the Middle East. They're trying to make it seem like they're all white people. Some people wish they could say they're all blonde, blue-eyed white people in India and Egypt, and so it is very stupid. Some people want you to think that they were like English people. I mean, these people are liars, and everyone knows it. When you're a serious scientist, when you're a serious researcher or historian, you know that the people who civilized the world were people of color. You have no doubt in your mind. I mean, they even do the same thing when it comes to Native Americans. They try to make it seem like there's these white guys, maybe brown hair and blue eyes and green eyes and whatever, that were in the islands and in the Americas. I mean, these people who come up with this stuff, they're crazy. And they're doing things to kind of rewrite history, right? They're revisionists. They're also controlling reproduction to rewrite history. Maybe 50 years from now, maybe they won't believe me. But every serious person right now, I can assure you, every serious adult with any kind of education, any kind of critical thinking skills, they know that I'm right. It's straightforward. Everyone knows it. So let's talk about martial arts. Say you go into karate or taekwondo or kempo, okay? Or hapkido. If you go into these martial arts, they tend to teach you things called katas, a series of movements. So when you first look at it, you're like, wow, I'm going to have to learn how to do the splits. That's going to be hard. I'm going to have to learn these series of movements, right? That's going to be hard, right? To memorize these movements. By the time you get to the black belt, you might have to learn hundreds of movements to get a black belt in karate or taekwondo. You know, you do a block, then a punch, you know, this kind of stance, and you've got to do it, you know, with a certain accuracy, or the guy corrects you, and you got to learn all kinds of movements. So the person who looks at that says, wow, that person has a lot of memory skills and a lot of memory as it pertains to their physical movements, right? Movement meaning mind, like in the word mental. And they're seeing them spar, and they're seeing them do these kicks and these moves, and they're seeing the various drills, and they're like, this takes a lot of brain power. Brain power. And so when we look at who's better than who, it's usually relative to two things. One, mental and physical ability. Two, you know, as they relate to each other, right? Two, whose race came up with the martial arts. So if you're doing Japanese karate, you'd expect Japanese to be among the best at it, right? Unless you see a black guy who's very smart, he's very coordinated, very athletic, very physically gifted. Pretty straightforward. I'm pretty sure most of you people, if not all of you, should agree with me right now, right? You basically all agree, right? Okay, if you disagree, put in the comments. So you see that some martial arts systems generally are for a group of people, by that group of people, not just Japanese, but a certain type of Japanese. Not just Korean with Taekwondo, but a certain type of Korean. That's why they came up with American Taekwondo, because they said that Korean Taekwondo is for them, by them. So a bunch of white guys are like military shaped and people like that. They said, hey, let's make a version that's for us, by us. Okay, so some guys who are kind of approaching military shape, rather. A minor correction there. So as they're seeing people block, and they're seeing people grab their, you know, their gis, right, their lapel, and they're seeing them break that grab, and they're strike, and doing these things called promise fighting, and these various techniques, right, hand techniques. They're seeing weapons, right, 2 sticks, right, maybe a staff in some cases. Maybe size, right? You see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where you have the staff, you have the sword. So some of these martial arts include weapons. Some de-emphasize weapons, and their forms without weapons are often called weaponless forms, called kata, right? Cat alpha, right? The lion, the leopard. The leopard is more martial art like than the lion is, right? The lion is strong and fierce and deadly. The leopard's more surgical and more kind of, you know, quick on its feet, more athletic, more deadly of a hunter, more insightful, more wise in that sense of the word. It has more sense, right? Sensei in karate, right? And sense, karate, right? Has the word cat scrambled into it. Ra being a word that refers to the sun. In Egypt, we have the sun and the Shinto and the Shinto sun gate as part of the greater Japanese religions. Part of the Budo, the Japanese martial arts, and there's various codes, right? Samurai code, and they talk about Bushido and various aspects of Japanese culture, and there's all kinds of stuff. There's sumo wrestling, there's different forms of karate, okay? There's ninjutsu, there's different, I think there's kendo, it's the art of the sword, if I'm not mistaken here. And so there's all sorts of martial arts, right? It goes on and on and on and on and on. And so these guys, to some degree, were competing with each other. They said, how can I outsmart this person? If you've seen the movie Ip Man, right, there's these different masters in the movie, and they're trying to beat each other. Yeah, that's very much how it was, where they're trying to beat. And how did they choose to try to beat each other? They chose sparring. If they got really angry, they'd hit each other hard, and they say, well, okay, we'll have full contact sparring. But if they're very polite and logical, and they realize the spirit is greater than the flesh, they would spar with maybe gear on and would have light contact. Remember the sun, light speed, Godspeed, fasting, light contact, sparring, and they'd make a point with point sparring. And sparring shows prioritization, it shows commitment to wise action, it shows various principles, right? Timing, okay, insight, vision, movement relative to wise action, you know, commitment to wise action. It shows various principles, discipline. And so it's an expression of who has a superior course if it's done right, who has a superior mentality, a superior state of being, right? Mind, body, soul, spirit. So sparring isn't just like MMA where you beat each other up, you mess up each other's brains, and you use reflexes, training reflexes, and learn behaviors. there's a deeper component. When you get to the highest level, you can't be the best without really having a profound understanding of life in martial arts. So when you see some guy who's just a priest and he just researches the Bible and the history of the churches, and he talks about Thomas Aquinas, or he talks about, Brigham Young and Joseph Smith or whatever. They're just guys who are researchers who believe that God is telling them something, if they even believe that, through the scripture. They're not someone who's really cultivated the essence of God's message. And that's what Paul was saying in Romans. He was saying, don't just believe some guy who just reads the Bible. Don't believe that Paul is greater than Christ. Don't believe that, because the kingdom of heaven is a matter of power, not mere talk. It's in Paul's letters. I believe it's 1 Corinthians 4:20. Ironically, it's 4:20. Okay, since I'm running out of space on my phone, let's wrap this up here in a couple of minutes here. Okay, so as people advance through their systems and they start getting more proficient and efficient, right? Proficient, efficient. And they start being more fast, right? There's faster and master. Again, Godspeed, light speed, fasting, light contact, sparring. They then, if they're logical, want to see where they're at. If they're not logical, they'll say things like, well, don't compare yourself to anyone else. That's hogwash. A martial art principle that's very important is comparing yourself to other people. If you don't do that, you're doing something else. You just happen to dabble in techniques. You're not really doing martial arts, because you have to understand why you're here. Well, how do you build character? You have to have existential intelligence. Why are you here in the first place? A good person tries to find their purpose in life, their deep purpose, their true purpose. Okay, so to just say, well, I don't care who they are and who I am, that's an airhead. Even the word care has the word R in it. C-R. See who people are. Estimate. Mate. To throw that out is stupid. Martial is marital scrambling. Okay. So as I'm faster and smarter, and I'm in the Spirit of God, and they're not, they fled from my challenge. Like the darkness flees from the light when the sun rises. They can make all kinds of excuses, but even a kid knows I'm right. Can you imagine somebody who's not as fast as I am, not as smart as I am, not as courageous, not as intense? And they're like, that's okay because I know a few cute tricks. Well, I've considered all your cute tricks, and I've beaten everybody with your cute tricks that comes around. It's that simple. Okay, basically. And so, logic would tell you, if you knock out Mike Tyson, for example, and of course martial arts go far beyond boxing. It's even called boxing, to box him in. Fencing, fence him in. Versus transcend and overcome, being from above, not below, not fenced in and boxed in from below. Okay, but logic would tell you, if we were talking about boxing, if you can knock out Mike Tyson, you can knock out the bully down the street. Okay, so using that scale, it was very clear to me early on that nobody could beat me. So by the time I got to about 2015, it was crystal clear that I'm the top martial artist. This is 11 years later. They resorted to fuming me and poisoning me, with everyone else basically doing what the governing class says. 8 billion plus people. The only reason the governing class would resort to doing that instead of trying to find someone to beat me is if they believe, like I believe, that no one could beat me. The logical assumption is all we have in life, scientifically speaking. Open and shut. David versus Goliath. The logical assumption was, if you beat Goliath, that you prove that there's a God in Israel. I beat everybody. I went beyond them and their fruit and their endeavors, their feats, their life paths, what have you, to prove that I am God's son and the top martial artist ever possible, because tech, breeding, cheating, and generational ill-gotten gain rule out people in the future, and I've surpassed everyone, up to this point. There was a time when there was only like 2 million people on the planet. Now there's over 8 billion. And my tribe, the center of martial arts, has evolved. Now they're devolving now because we've reached the pinnacle point. And the jealous worms are doing what they do. Okay, so I went over time already. Let's just shoot through this. So Romans 1 verse 18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Okay, so they're suppressing the truth. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. They're suppressing me. They're keeping people in the dark. The churches, mosques, synagogues, so they worship the devil. Basically, all the major factions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are aware of me, and probably all the churches are aware that I'm here, and so on and so forth. So why aren't they rallying to me and obeying God through me? Because they walk in darkness. They're suppressing the truth by their wickedness. Open and shut. It's also why they can't beat me in martial arts. Open and shut. Since what may be known about God is plain to them. right? So why is it playing? They know they're not supposed to do what they're doing. They know not to cheat the top martial artists ever possible. They're just too evil and too cowardly, too immature to do the right thing. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So humanity has been moving toward mind, body, soul, and spirit for hundreds of thousands of years, at least around 1,000 years. Okay, they have a spear, and they have sticks, and they're hunting, and they're fishing, and they're at some point eventually they start farming. Okay, they start using their head, and their hunting is a huge part. Hunter-gatherers, right? To gather. Marshal means to arrange, to gather, to order. Okay, whoever doesn't marshal with me, whoever doesn't gather with me, scatters, arrange, right? Alpha range, Ra range. Ra means evil in Hebrew. They call good evil and evil good. That's what the Bible says. Look it up. And Ra was a word that I think the Greeks assigned to the Egyptian deity of the sun that symbolized God. The sun wasn't just the sun. You know, Ra isn't just the sun, it's the sun symbolizing God. For though they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So their thinking became futile, right? Futile. So martial arts is about mental development. Okay, they were nowhere near mentally qualified to take me on as sparring, because they didn't glorify God. They didn't obey God through me. So their martial arts went to, garbage, right? Martial is marital. Their marriages went to garbage. Their dating went to garbage. We call date, right? The time, the end times. Date and mate, late, fate, rate, what have you. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And they are fools who are dumb enough to cheat the top martial artist ever possible out of his right to lead. Instead, what are they doing? They're jocks, they're this, they're that. They're a bunch of idiots. Less than Simpsons, less than Jetsons, clowns, fools, imbeciles, useless filth.